I'm here to talk to you today about how to plan a business. And I'm going to answer three basic questions. The first one is, what is a business plan? The second is, why is it important? And the third is, how do you make one? And before I start, I wanted to say a few things about who I am and why I think I can tell you about these things. I'm a strategy and entrepreneurship consultant and professor at University College London's Business School. My work is in designing businesses to be more innovative and more resilient to uncertainty. But I specialize in the F&B industry. I started looking at restaurants a decade ago when I found myself in the basement kitchen of one of Jose Andres' restaurants. That's Jose right there. I was researching innovation teams at the time, and I thought it would be more enjoyable to look at food R&D instead of semiconductors or pharmaceuticals. So I went to a lecture that Jose was giving at Harvard. And after the lecture, I asked him, sort of as a joke, if he would let me shadow his R&D team for a few weeks and just see what they were doing. So when he said yes, I was a bit taken aback, but I showed up down in DC anyway. And I ended up spending many years thereafter watching how several really innovative, super adaptable R&D teams worked. I was at the Cooking Lab, which makes modernist cuisine and other books that you know about. I was at the Fat Duck, which was one of the pioneers of cutting-edge cuisine, and in recent years has been exploring really interesting new ground and telling stories in food across the entire arc of a meal. And I've also worked with the people at NOMA and the MAD Symposium, among other things, helping them develop the program for the fifth MAD in 2016. Now, what I found across all of these innovative and resilient teams is that they really saw uncertainty as an opportunity and as a challenge, not just something to be afraid of, to get rid of. And they would even seek it out in the work that they took on. This way of thinking allowed them to be really resilient in their business planning, because it allowed them to keep on coming up with new products and services that were adapted as changing conditions evolved. Now, what makes a business successful? First of all, it has to make enough money. It has to sell products that people want to buy at a cost that is less than what you can charge them. But a really important thing, which we really don't talk about enough, is that a successful business has to let its owners do the work that they want to do. And blending the two is really hard. Many independent coffee businesses fail within the first 5 years. And net profit margins are really low industry-wide anyway. So you would imagine that what this means is people must really love working in specialty coffee. But despite that, many people in the industry are unhappy. And it isn't just because they aren't making enough money. It's really because many of them aren't doing what they dreamed of when they started their business in the first place. So many of you here will know Handsome Coffee Roasters, which was started in LA in 2011. Immediately after they started, they were already really successful. The media loved them. The specialty coffee industry loved them. And yet, just a few years after they started, everything kind of fell apart. The three founders went their separate ways. Blue Bottle bought the business. And one of the co-founders, Tyler Wells, said, Handsome started as three guys who wanted to make coffee and be nice to people. We never wanted to run an HR department or be bookkeepers. And he went on to say that the whole operation surrounding roasting and distribution is massive, and he'd envisioned something smaller and more intimate. It wasn't where he wanted to be, so he left. What this shows is that there is a trap in business. And the trap is this. Many businesses neither make you enough money nor let you do what you love. The reason why business planning is important is because proper business planning helps you avoid this trap. Okay, so what is a business plan? A business plan is nothing more than a description of what you want to build and why you think it will succeed. And what this means is guessing on paper. And guessing on paper forces you to be clear about the trade-offs you're willing to make in running your business, the things you're willing to give up to get what you're trying to get. A lot of people think that a business plan is a spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet is not really the point. The spreadsheet is just a tool. The business plan is for the entrepreneur first to clarify your thinking about what you're trying to build. And then the spreadsheet that you produce for the investor and for the bank, that comes distinctly second. So going back to why a business plan is important, it's really important to think about business planning because the end result of your business, the one that actually you start, the one that becomes successful, it rarely looks like what you expected it to look like at the beginning of the process. And a lot of you will be familiar with the process of coming up with a new drink or a new product that you put in your coffee shop. This is just to illustrate a project that barista champion Pete Williams did when he was coaching Hugh Kelly for the Australian Barista Championships in 2019. And this was a signature drink to illustrate how environmental changes affect the fermentation process for fruit. The final product was an espresso drink with a lacto-fermented plum and a rose extract. But the process of developing that final product went through many, many stages. Pete was developing and learning and trying things out, failing along the way before he got to the finished product that worked really well. The key with all this is that much like developing a new drink, for businesses, you learn what your business will be by trying things out and seeing if they work. And business planning is a way of doing cost-free prototyping, cost-free trying things out. And this is super important because starting a business is risky and it's also uncertain. And it's also all-consuming. You have so much on the line, you no longer have a salary to depend on, you're investing your savings, you're often investing money of investors who believe in you. Plus, and this is the most important thing, you're investing your own time. So it makes sense to think carefully before committing to starting a business. And business planning is a way to think carefully about your business before you've even started it. So what do you need to do business planning? Many people think that you need months of time, special software, you need expensive consultants, but none of this is true. You don't need any of that. A lot of people also think that it's okay to just use somebody else's business plan, which is somebody else's spreadsheet. And again, I'm going to say that's not true. Just say no. And I'm going to explain a little bit more why it's especially important not to just take somebody else's spreadsheet and update it for your own business later on. Now, all it takes to do business planning is paying attention, being honest with yourself, and facing up to reality. And you can do it in three very simple steps. The first step is getting some clarity about what you're trying to do. The second step is modeling it out so that you can see how the numbers work. And the third step is adjusting it so that the numbers work with the plan that you're trying to implement. So now we can move on to how you actually write a business plan. This involves getting clarity about what you're trying to do in the first place. And you can get clarity usually by writing it down. So all you need to do first to start is to write down what you think you want your business to be. You have to answer a bunch of questions like where you want it to be, what the average check will be like, who your ideal customer will be, how many staff you will have, how much you want to pay them, and how much you need to earn. But I think the most important question is what kind of product is it that you're going to try and make and sell. You'll find this full list of questions on my website, vaughntan.org/businessmodel. It's free to download. And the important thing when you're answering these questions is you should be asking yourself how to play to your strengths. What can your business do which nobody else can do? And this may be about a certain type of product or being able to serve a certain type of customer or even having a certain type of space. Here are some examples. A business plan that is unique like this can simply be directly sourcing and roasting coffee and building beautiful spaces around the world in which guests can experience it. This, for instance, is one of Verve's shops. It's the one on Mateo Street in LA. It can also mean creating a tiny 6-seat bar to experiment with and highlight manual methods. That's Square Mile's Penny University project in London. Or if you're like Jack Benchikol, who was a biochemist before he got into coffee, your business plan could be about a small coffee bar in LA that also has a dessert and beverage pairing series that's a private dinner series called 9, and also a line of ready-to-drink coffee and tea beverages that use Jack's understanding of process, his awareness of coffee, and also some of his flavor experimentation that came out of the dessert project, and kind of brings it all together. So his bar called Endorphin is one of my favorite places to have coffee in LA. And what I'm trying to say is the business model that you come up with that is something that only you can do can look really quite unusual. And it can be unusual to the point where it looks completely unfamiliar, not like coffee at all. So my friends at Luminaire Coffee have become engineering consultants to the specialty coffee industry. They're all trained engineers, and they use their engineering expertise with their knowledge of coffee to help companies in specialty coffee, including La Marzocco, redesign their equipment so that it works better. What all those examples maybe highlight is that you should try to be different in a way that makes sense for what you want to do and in a way that only you can do it. And of course, it's going to take time and effort to figure out what that different thing is. But the key to business planning is to recognize that your business plan will not be perfect the first time. It's the thinking about what you want that goes into the business planning. That's the really important part. So in order to do that, what you first should do is you should block off a few hours, go somewhere quiet, and turn off your phone, and then try and answer these questions. And really importantly, don't just think about your answers, write them down. And when you write them down, highlight the answers that are most important to you in one color, then highlight the answers that are least important to you in a different color. What that's going to do is it's going to highlight for you what the really important things are to you and what the things that are less important that you're willing to trade off. Once you've done that, you can go to the next step, which is to model things out. Now, modeling things out just means putting things into a spreadsheet. And the purpose of this is to see what happens when the rubber hits the road. When you take the ideas you've written down and you make them into something that you force yourself to put into numbers. And when you do this, it's really important to not just ask someone for their spreadsheet and just change the numbers. Other people's spreadsheets represent other people's goals and priorities, not yours. What you should be doing is you should be putting onto a spreadsheet your idea of what you are trying to build and putting numbers to that so that you can illustrate to yourself whether or not your idea for a business actually makes economic sense. And when you're doing this, of course, because you haven't started the business yet, you won't know exactly what these numbers are. But you should try and get as many realistic estimates of major numbers as possible. And anything that you can't get an estimate for, guess. But when you guess, be realistic and be conservative. There is also a free, easy-to-use, empty spreadsheet at the same website, vaughntan.org/businessmodel. And I'm going to talk through some of what's on that spreadsheet right now. You don't have to use this. It just happens to be free and easy to use. And it doesn't have some of the problems of using somebody else's spreadsheet where there are assumptions baked into it. So any business planning process has just a few parts to it. The first part is to figure out how you make money. What are you going to sell? How much of it are you going to sell? And how much will people pay you for it? Another part is to figure out what your costs will be, right? What your fixed costs will be, what your variable costs will be. And then a third part will be figuring out what resources you have. And once you've got all of that information in your spreadsheet, it should also tell you at the end whether you're breaking even or not. And this is what that free spreadsheet that's on my website will do for you. The third part, once you've done that, is to adjust. Because as you model things out, you may realize the numbers just don't work. And these numbers may rise or fall on very small changes to your business model, right? So for instance, in this example, if you have your average price of a drink at $5, you are slightly breaking even. You're just making enough money to cover your costs. But if you decide you wanted to drop that price to $4.50, suddenly you're in the red. So essentially what you're trying to do now with adjusting is you're trying to look at the idea that you have for a business. You've turned it into a spreadsheet that illustrates how that business looks in numbers. And then if those numbers work, you're good to go. But if they don't work, you need to change what those numbers are, change some of your assumptions so that they do. You need to change what you need to change. But importantly, you need to do this not only on the spreadsheet. You need to be consistent between the plan of what you're trying to build, that page of answers that you filled out, and the economics, the spreadsheet that you're creating. If you find that there's no way to make the business work unless your drinks average is incredibly high, like $8 a drink on average, you can definitely say that you're not building a casual stop-in coffee shop where people come in for a morning cup on their commute to work. The essential thing is to make sure that the answers to the questions that you're asking yourself about what business you're trying to build look like what's on the spreadsheet, and that what's on the spreadsheet works economically in the sense that you're at least breaking even. It's also important for me to point out now that that spreadsheet, if you use the one that I provide, is not really ready yet to go to a bank or an investor with, because you will need to add things that are very, very local, like your local and your state taxes. What the spreadsheet does for you is it helps you see very, very quickly whether or not the business that you're planning, just at a baseline, kind of makes sense. Because if you're losing money every month, that business has not yet begun to make sense. And the way to make it make sense is to change your mind about some of the things you're doing in a way that's still consistent with what you're trying to do. So for instance, if you find that you just can't make your business model that you're trying to build work in Manhattan, think about somewhere that is maybe less expensive, another city like maybe Pittsburgh. If you find that a way of thinking about how often you open and when you open doesn't work, think about changing that so that it does work. And the question that you may be asking is, when do you stop? And the answer is you stop when the spreadsheet shows at least a break even and the description of the answers that you have to the questions that you pose about your business is still something you honestly want to open and run. In combination, you now have a business plan. But this business plan shouldn't be static. When the situation changes, go back and look at your plan and maybe think about changing it. Okay, so now I just wanted to wrap up. In summary, what I'm saying about business planning and why it's so important is that it helps you make enough money by doing what you love. And the way it helps you do this is it helps you avoid the trap. It does this by forcing you to use common sense about being clear about what you want. And the way to do this is to first be clear about what you want, fill out that list of answers to the questions about what your business is going to be, and then modeling it out. Guess when necessary, but be realistic and conservative, and adjust your plan if you need to. And then be sure to change your model when the situation changes. And also, really importantly, be sure to build your own model. Don't just borrow somebody else's spreadsheet and fill it in by changing the numbers. Now, if you do this, there is a chance that you can build a business that not only works, but also does what you love. My friend Nico, who has a sweet little coffee shop in Paris called Telescope, has a business that really works for him, that he gets to run exactly as he wants. It's really small, he knows his customers, and he makes bread in the basement. He goes on holiday a few months a year. It's a really nice place to be. And it's not just if you want to run a really small coffee shop that you can do this. Going back to my friends at Luminaire, they found a really unusual niche in the specialty coffee world that plays exactly to their strengths and also happens to fill a need that until they showed up, nobody else could fill. So, just to conclude, thinking clearly about your business is essential before you commit to running a business. And if you think about it, it's even more essential if the situation changes. If you have thought really carefully about what your business will be by doing some business planning, when the situation suddenly changes, you're no longer panicking as much. You are able to think rationally and realistically about how to modify your business to adapt to the situation. And this is really, really helpful, as we've seen in the course of the last year. So you have nothing to lose but a couple of hours, and there's a lot to gain from doing this process of business planning. So just to finish, a lot of the ideas that I've talked about, I also talk about in my book, The Uncertainty Mindset, Innovation Insights from the Frontiers of Food. You can find out more about it on its website, uncertaintymindset.org. I also write a newsletter that's free about how to deal with not knowing in everyday and work life as a way of doing something that's new. You can find out more about that at uncertaintymindset.substack.com. And I'm also building some tools to help people learn how to handle uncertainty and discomfort in ways that make them grow as people. And you can find out more about that at productivediscomfort.org. I'm very happy for people to get in touch with me, so feel free to get in touch. You can find me on the internet, on Twitter, on Instagram, and by email. And now I'm really looking forward to any questions that you might have and a conversation about business planning right after this. So great, here we go.
Thanks to Vaughn so much for that presentation. While we wait here for Vaughn to join us, I just want to remind everyone to leave your questions in the chat to the right of this video, where you're viewing it on retail.sca.coffee. You'll need to select channels and then Q&A to add or to vote for questions that are there, and we'll be pulling them in here to ask Vaughn when he comes and joins us. Hi, Vaughn. We have a stack of questions, and I know there are some people who are really anxious to hear from you. So one of the first
Cool.
questions that we had in was that someone is working on their business plan right now. How can they estimate
Right.
or guesstimate the volume of sales in the beginning when they don't have any customers yet? Would it be easier to estimate growth from an existing business, or to assume that like overestimate from the very start?
I think, well, there's no definitely correct answer, but one thing you should do if you are trying to run a business is talk to people who are in maybe the same part of town doing kind of the same kind of thing, just to understand what they think is normal. And one thing I always recommend is underestimate how much money you are going to take in and how much it's going to cost you to make that money, right? So estimate for less money coming in and more money going out. And if the business still kind of makes sense, you are probably going to be safer anyway.
That's good advice. What is the biggest mistake you see made in business plans? I assume you see quite a few of these.
Yeah, I think I don't know what the biggest mistake is, but I can talk about 2 or 3 common mistakes, which I think are kind of unnecessary and not very good. One big problem with a business plan is kind of putting all your hopes on one single idea that absolutely has to work perfectly in order for your business to work. I think it makes a lot more sense, especially if you're trying to do something new, to instead have a business plan that allows you to try lots of things and learn from them whether or not they succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you figure out that one idea for a product or a service does work, you can provide it at a price that people are willing to pay that is more than what it costs you to provide it. You can add that and keep adding more and more of these things that work to your overall, I guess you can think of it as a business plan portfolio. So one mistake is having just one product, I think you would say, in your business plan. I think another mistake is thinking that your business plan, when you first start thinking about it, needs to somehow be perfect and needs to be the final business plan that you use when you are actually running the business once it's stabilized. In fact, if you talk to literally anyone who's got a business at all, the idea that they had when they first started their business, whether it's in coffee or technology or anything, is, I would say, never, ever what the final plan is, right? The final plan is the result of you learning over the course of months or years what works as a business and what works for you. And so the other big mistake is thinking you somehow have to know what that is before you've even begun. And I think that's just, I mean, it's bullshit, right? Nobody should be telling you that because it's just not true.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting thinking about sort of like that iterative process. I think so many people sort of go into something and assume that like they need to get it right the very first time, but that's really hard. And like being comfortable with that uncertainty is a lot of the work that you do, right? So iteration is the key then. Yeah,
for sure. And it's not just iteration, but it's iteration in small steps, each one of which is designed so that even if it fails, you still learn, and then importing the learning into the next iteration. So it's not just about small steps, it's about making sure that every step you take, even if it fails, it has been designed to teach you something. And that part, I think, is something which is, it sounds very obvious when you say it, but I think you need to actually think about how you would do that when you're designing each one of those steps.
Yeah. At what point in the planning process should you reach out to possible vendors to work with?
I mean, I would say at the earliest possible stage. So I think this is especially true. This is especially true in a business like coffee, right? Where so much of your identity as a business depends on who you work with for equipment and for supply. And so I think it maybe does help at the beginning as you're thinking about what your business will be, to also think about, especially in coffee, what kind of business do you want to be in terms of what kind of product are you trying to be the mediator of, right? Especially if you're serving the coffee in the end, a lot of the identity of a coffee shop depends on who you choose to serve coffee from, and also how you choose to serve it and the space in which you serve it. So from that perspective, I would say there is almost no time when it is too early to think about all the people that you need to work with in order to run the business that you want to run. And I think it's not just suppliers, it also applies to customers. There's almost no time that is too early to talk to a customer about whether or not they might be interested in paying you some money for the thing you're trying to produce, right? Because there's almost nothing worse than spending a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money starting a business and having not spoken to any potential customer along the way, not realizing that you're making something that nobody wants to buy.
Right. And how does that balance when you talk about doing the thing that you can do that nobody else can do? I know that a lot of people, and you referenced some examples at the beginning there of people who really just, they had a clear vision of what they wanted to create. What is that sort of balance of what happens if the customer demand doesn't meet sort of your own desire to create a particular kind of business? Is it just, it's no-go? Is it a learning experience? Is it just is there a balance there?
Yeah, I think this is one of the questions that seems like kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? But I think what usually happens is if you are clear enough about what you really want, and this includes also being really clear about what you're willing to give up to get what you really want, you can eventually figure out whether or not there is a demand for the thing that you're trying to sell, whether it's product or service, and very importantly, whether you are in the right place. So, and this I think especially applies to coffee and the kind of business to consumer model for a lot of coffee. If you're serving coffee to people, sometimes you simply cannot do what you're trying to do in a particular place because the people who might want your product are not there, right? Or maybe people do want your product, but rent is just way too high. You can't possibly do it and make the numbers work. And so when you figure those things out, you may know what you're trying to provide. And then the question becomes, how do you go to a place where there are people who want to buy it, right? You may know that those people exist, but they just happen to not be where you are. Or how do you go to a place where there are both the people who want to buy it and also the cost of doing business in terms of rent, whether you've got access to the right people to work for you, all make sense. And all of that is part of business planning. That's why when you are thinking about, and I see a question about break-even analysis, it comes to this issue as well. If you're thinking about how to think about your business, the baseline requirement is you need to be able to make enough money long-term or even short-term so that you can keep doing the business. And if something about how you've configured it in terms of how much you price or where you choose to be located or how many units you sell doesn't allow you to break even, you have to either change what you're selling or go somewhere where all the other numbers will change a little bit, maybe go down, maybe go up, so that at the very least you break even and then begin to go up above that.
Mm-hmm. I see a stack of questions here sort of piling up, so I'm gonna move us through relatively quickly while still addressing all of them. How would you suggest someone refine their business idea if maybe it's starting to look like it's doing too many things? Thinking of the combination of skills you mentioned in regards to endorphin.
Yes, it's a really good question. The really quick answer to that is I would almost always recommend, and this is not just for coffee, it's for every kind of business. I would recommend trying things out as much as possible, one at a time, to figure out whether or not that idea works, right? So I think maybe the thing that people are thinking about is Jack's business model at Endorphin, where he's got 3 different things that are all businesses. And I think he had them all in mind, but he did not do all of them at the same time. So if I recall correctly, he started the cafe first. And then when the cafe was stable, he added the dessert supper club, which I think he had been running before, but he didn't integrate it with the cafe. And he didn't really start thinking about productizing the ready to drink until I think many years after the cafe had started going. So in the end, you may get to a point where you've got lots of things that you are doing, and you may start wanting to do lots of things. But I would never recommend starting by doing all of those things. I would start by doing the thing that appears to be able to make you enough money to survive. And then once you stabilize that, you add another thing, get that to the point where it's also breaking even or making money, then add another thing. And so the important thing is not to do lots and lots of things without validating that each one of those things works. It's to start by doing one thing or a small number of things, validating that those work, and then adding more along the way. And eventually you'll get to the point where you're like Jack, right? Where you've got 3 things that all kind of work, and together they work pretty well.
Yeah. How much or little detail should be included at the beginning stage of modeling?
It depends on who the audience is. Like, if I'm thinking about what a business model is for, it's for two reasons. One of them is, as the entrepreneur, it's for me to understand what I'm trying to do and figure out whether there's any imaginable reality in which what I'm trying to do makes me enough money, right? So actually, to me, that's the most important thing. Now, for that, what you need is you need exactly as much detail as you need to be able to represent what you're trying to do, and all of the real world constraints that you are going to face, like how much things are going to cost, and realistically whether or not you're going to be able to sell enough of what you're trying to sell for the price that you think you're going to be able to sell it for. Now, that's a kind of a how long is a piece of string answer. You need to get enough information into your model to make you yourself comfortable with it. Then the question becomes, how do you present that to a potential investor or a bank to loan you some money? At that point, things become much more, I guess, obvious, because there are going to be some things that investors will want to know that you must include, right? So unless you're getting an investor who is trying to do some charity, you will need to tell them how much money you need from them, how long it will take you to either pay them back, or what their cut of the profits will be, however you choose to arrange it. If it's a bank, you'll have to tell them what security there will be on their investment, how long a loan you need. So all those things, once you are talking to investors or banks, you're in a slightly different place from when you're just figuring out for yourself what business you're trying to run. And those things, you really do need to think about who it is that you're talking to. If it's a certain kind of investor, they will want some specific information. If it's a bank, they will want yet a different kind of information. And it's really about learning who you're talking to at that point to figure out what you put into the business model that you present to them.
Yeah. There's a question here. I see a bunch of them. Some of them are sort of related, so I'm going to try and group them together, which is just sort of the question around projecting some of those numbers from the start, particularly around labor and hours of operation. Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I definitely would say is, if you have worked in a similar type of business to the one that you're trying to start, definitely use your insights. Like, so if what you want to do is open a coffee shop, and you've worked in a coffee shop before, you have some information that allows you to estimate what your labor and hours of operation look like. I think even if you haven't, this is where it becomes important to really start to think about what you care about in terms of what your business needs to be, right? So one thing to think about in terms of hours of operation is, if you want to be able to have a family life that allows you to go home and spend time with family or kids at night, you simply cannot expect to be running a business that starts at 7 a.m. and goes until 10 p.m. because that doesn't work with what you are trying to get out of the business. So I think starting from what you know about how much labor is going to be needed, and then, very importantly, figuring out what you want it to be, that's the start. And then if you realize that, I only want to work 3 days a week from like 10 a.m. until 4 p.m., you realize that there's just no way you can make enough money in those hours. Then you may need to change those hours, and it'll eat away at your personal time. And then you need to figure out how much you are willing to have your personal time be eaten away and still have a business that you're willing to run. So again, this is another one of those how long is a piece of string questions, but the two most important parts are, if you have any knowledge about it yourself from having worked in something similar before, use that to help you estimate things, but always be clear about what you actually want from the business in order to make the business worth running for you.
That's great. So we have a question here that is about sort of wondering what percentage of entrepreneurs, and I'm guessing because you've worked with a variety of entrepreneurs sort of in food and bev, specifically, do you think actually make a business plan? How, do you think that there is it this person is asking if it's a sort of a cultural drive, or if there is... Yeah.
It's a great question. I think usually, so I don't know how generic, I would not be able to say what percentage, but I have two thoughts about this. One of them is, most of the time people only make a business plan when they need to raise money. And what they normally do when they need to raise money and make a business plan is they go to someone who has started a business of, in some cases, whatever sort, even if it's nothing like the business they're trying to start. And they say, can you give me your spreadsheet? And then I'm just going to go change some numbers inside. And what happens then is, if you raise money based on a business plan that essentially somebody else created, and you just change some numbers, what actually is happening is that you are forcing yourself long-term to run a business that you didn't plan. And there is no real surprise in my mind about why people are unhappy when they end up running businesses that they didn't really want to run in the first place, but that they designed that way because they needed to get money to run. So what percentage of entrepreneurs actually make a business plan that's a real one, where they think about what they want, what they're willing to give up, and how they're going to implement that as a business? I would say a surprisingly, unfortunately, very small number. But I'm hoping that after this, people will do it more often. Is there a cultural element to making a business plan? I think absolutely. If you, for instance, went to business school, they will tell you that you need to do business modeling, business planning. So you will sort of treat that as a default thing to do. I think essentially, you don't have to come from a culture of business planning to do a good business plan. You just need to think clearly about what you're trying to do and how that manifests itself in what stuff you sell, when you sell it, who you sell it to, and how much you sell it for, right? If you can answer those questions, you've basically already done a business plan. And I would say there is absolutely no reason not to do it. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of money. And what it does is it helps you figure out whether your dream of running a business could actually make sense if you put numbers to everything that makes sense to you, right? So there's two parts again. Does the idea that you have make sense to do if you put numbers to it that make sense to you? And if you do those two things and it doesn't make sense, it doesn't break even, that should tell you something about the idea. And the fact that most people don't seem to do that before they invest years of their lives and a lot of money in doing it, to me makes absolutely no sense at all.
Yeah. So we have a question that you've mentioned a couple of times that like the business plan is often something to think like we should be doing it for ourselves. We relate that that's the most important bit because you're going to be sinking your time and your effort into your own business. But oftentimes that's the thing that we get asked to hand over to find financing some way, whether that's bank investment, whether that's looking for other investors. And we have a question here that is asking about the difference between maybe a business plan for a landlord versus an investor or a bank. If there are specific elements of detail you would recommend for once they've taken this internal business plan that is, going to help them make sure that their business is sustainable for them. How do you communicate that? What pieces of information would be really helpful to communicate that to potential investors or people who are going to help you run your business?
Absolutely. So I think there is maybe no, it's not a misconception. I think lots of people believe it, and it's probably true, that there is a type of business plan that you give to a landlord or an investor or a bank. I prefer to think of it a slightly different way. A business plan is really a way you make an argument to an audience of some sort that your business is worth investing in some way, right? If it's a landlord, it's that you should be allowed to occupy the space for this amount of rent. If it's an investor, it's that you should be given some amount of money in exchange for some consideration. If it's a bank, you should be given a loan in exchange for some kind of terms of interest. And so if I were thinking about how to describe the differences between business plans for different audiences, it always comes down to what you believe the audience wants to invest in, right? So if I were selling a business idea to a landlord, I would try and understand whether they care about things like what they call in the business the amenity value of a business, right? So if you are a landlord who owns a mixed-use development that has residential, offices, and commercial, one thing that they try and do is they try and put in tenants in the commercial part of the mixed-use development that add value for the other occupants, the people in the offices, the people in the residential. And so from that perspective, if I knew that was what the landlord wanted, I would build the business plan around how I'm trying to make community in the space. I will be open for all the hours that would make sense for people who are both in the offices, 8 to 5, as well as people who live there on the weekends. So I'll open 7 days a week and serve people who are both residential and also in the commercial spaces. And I think a lot of it, I can't overemphasize this enough, the business plan is just a form of an argument to whoever you're talking to about why your business idea makes sense to invest in for some reason. And so it's not to say that there is no consistency between different business plans given to landlords. It's that you need to understand what your landlord wants before you can make a convincing argument that your landlord should want you or the investor or the bank. And if you know that, then you can make it very compelling, right? You can show them what they want to see but you can only show them what they want to see when you know what they want to see in the first place. And then you can describe what you do in that context.
Yeah. And then one final question, it might be a quick one, and it's super cool if the answer is, I don't know, but somebody's asking if there is an industry data resource for local or a national ratio of rent to labor to profit for coffee. We know that there's stuff that exists in the sort of restaurant world, but we're not sure if there's anything floating around there in terms of coffee resources that you've seen.
I have not seen anything like that. And I also know that we often see such info reference for restaurants where they say something like, for instance, your food cost needs to be 15 or 20 or 25% of your plate cost. And the thing that I have found again and again is that those have become kind of like weird guidelines that everyone sort of places a lot of faith in. But then you find successful businesses that completely violate those rules, right? There are some businesses where the food cost is 50%, and those are rare, but they are nonetheless very successful. Yeah. And so I think what you need to do is you need to sort of make all the numbers sit together and see whether or not as a whole they make sense. For instance, if you decide that you want to serve really expensive coffee, as in expensive to you coffee, but you are in a place where you can create a setting and a story that makes your customers really willing to pay a lot of money for that coffee, it doesn't matter whether your cost of goods sold is super high, because your actual revenue coming in from that and your profit is also really high. And so I wouldn't try and find numbers that are universally correct for everyone. What I would try and do is try and build a total business model that pays itself off, right? It breaks even and then gets better after that. And if it looks weird, you've got a novel, innovative business model. And that's really cool itself.
Yeah. We have a little bit more time than I thought we did, so we can actually go through some more of these questions, which is great because they are stacked. Like there's so many of them, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture all of these questions here, and afterwards sort of take them back, because Vaughn is going to be speaking at RICO in about a month's time, and so maybe we can find a way to address some of those there as well. Any of the ones we can't address today, but here's an interesting one, and I'm not sure that, again, like this could open an interesting discussion in terms of what you've seen in the restaurant world. But somebody has asked, what can specialty coffee producers do to better engage with retail or end customers in their planning phase? And of course, there are lots of, I think, maybe difficulties in terms of access to perhaps the retail end customers, but from your perspective and maybe what you've seen in terms of restaurant businesses working with perhaps food producers, is there anything there you can speak to that might help or be interesting?
I think it's a really good question. I just want to clarify, when you talk about specialty coffee producers, you mean the growers of the bean, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think a really good analog to this is another beverage, which is wine. And what you see with wine is you see, not uniformly, but you see consumers, the end consumer of wine, beginning to, I guess, appreciate wine, not just because it is served by a particular restaurant, right, which is the analog to a coffee shop, but because it's produced by a specific person or company, like a winery or a winemaker, out of a specific type of product, like a type of grape, or through a particular process, like carbonic maceration. And so if we kind of port that model over to coffee, right now, my understanding of the specialty coffee business is that it is trying to move people in the direction of recognizing quality, not only at the level of the cafe that produces it, that was the first step, and then you go back one step, it's the roaster that roasts it. What you want to do is you want to find a way, if I understand this question correctly, to go one step before that to the producer who produces it, the type of bean, which I think now people are starting to be interested in, as well as how it is processed. And I think the only way you can do that is, well, not the only way, but two ways I can think of doing that are, if as a producer you have enough money that you can invest in branding of yourself as a producer, and this is what wineries do. The other thing that you can do, because I think in coffee it's much rarer for producers to have that much money in some producing countries, not all of them. The other thing you can do if you don't have those resources as a producer is you can collectively market yourselves. So you cannot market as one producer from this region, but you can market as a collection of producers. And I think something like Cup of Excellence is something like that, right? Where there is a idea of quality that attaches to having participated in this and been seen to be at some level of quality in that program. I think you can do that not only in the context of something like Cup of Excellence, but you can also do it in the context of a geographic region. So these are coffees of a region. And I think countries like Rwanda have done something like that. You can also do it in terms of a philosophy, right? So if you find other growers who are growing in a particular way, like organic growers or growers of, autochthonous and indigenous varieties, and they're not necessarily even in the same country, you can pair up with them across the world and then co-market together so that at least you've got branding that eventually makes it to the consumer. The basic insight here, I think, is you need to find a way to identify individually or as a group in a way that the end consumer or the retail consumer sees it and sees value in promoting that onward. And whatever way you can do that, whether it's by working with the roaster or by working with the cafe or by banding with other producers or by getting government support to do it as a region or as a country, all of those could work. And I think it just depends on what it is that you find is your USP, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing. Like, what is the thing that you can do that no one else can do? I also
absolutely.
There's a question that I missed a question earlier, and I think maybe this would be a good one to sort of we'll see. But for businesses who are not faring so well in COVID-19, we've obviously clearly had a lot of shocks. Food and bev has been hit pretty. I mean, everyone's been hit really hard, but food and bev and coffee have been hit particularly hard. What do you say to a business that is not doing well at the moment in terms of like how they could use the tool that you've created to try and maybe identify the problem or also to fix it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And unfortunately, there is no definite, I wish I could say, if you do this, everything will be fine, but there's no way I can say that. I think there's two ways I would think about this. One way is a lot of businesses that were quite stable before a massive disruption were just doing things as they normally did them because it all seemed to work, right? And so if that's the case, it is often the case, not always the case, but often the case that you don't understand what things really cost and whether or not they need to cost that much. So one thing you can do, and I think this goes to what you said, Jen, is that spreadsheet, if you simply put in your current numbers, you can begin to see how if you play with your current numbers in creative ways, like, maybe if I charge a little bit more for this drink, or if I find a way to sell a little bit more of this product, or if I go from 3 full-time employees to 2.5 full-time employees, what does that do to my set of numbers, right? So that's one thing you can do. And that's kind of, I would call it diagnostic, followed by a way of tweaking ideas without having to do anything in real life yet. Right. So if you find that you can go from 3 full-time employees to 2.5 and all of a sudden things are breaking even, then you can have the very difficult thought experiment and then real experiment of figuring out which employee to drop to half-time. But you don't have to do it until you know that that would actually do something that was important. Right. So that diagnostic thing is useful. I think the other thing that I have seen businesses that have successfully sort of pivoted repeatedly in COVID times do is think about what other things they can sell, whether they're products or services, and what effect that can have on the bottom line. And the reason I say this is because it's often really easy to imagine that you can sell something and that people will want to buy it without thinking very concretely about how much it will cost to actually be able to get to the point where you can sell that thing. Yeah. And one thing which the spreadsheet does do is it gives you the opportunity to say, okay, I'm a cafe. I want to sell, I'm just going to take a random example, vegetable boxes. And all of my customers in Brooklyn will love vegetable boxes, so this is going to be a great product. But what the spreadsheet may force you to do is realize that, yes, you also have to invest in setting up a supply chain to get the boxes to you. You have to invest in a new set of fridges because, coffee doesn't really take a lot of storage, but Vegetables take a lot of storage. You have to invest in packaging. You have to invest in delivery. You have to invest in online order taking, all of those things you've got to do. So once you think about this new product and you're forced to say how much it's going to cost you to be able to sell it, you may realize it's not actually such a good idea after all. And it may then lead you to think about other kinds of products or services that may be a better idea, not just because the idea itself is good, but the implementation of it is reasonable and makes sense. So I think two ways that the tool, that specific spreadsheet, but more generally the idea of business modeling can help is you can, in the first instance, look at your current operation and figure out how you can change it so that it begins to either bleed less or stop bleeding.
Yeah.
And the second one is you can use the tool and this way of thinking to imagine new kinds of products and services that you can sell so that you can make up for the things that you used to sell but you can't sell anymore, and force yourself to think about what it would cost you to actually be able to sell those new products and services.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really important to do both of those things, right? It's important to diagnose the problem so that you can figure out ways to solve it, and also think about potential new things that you can sell to replace the things that you no longer can sell, but do it in a really realistic and grounded way in terms especially of how much it's going to cost you to get to the point where you can sell those new things.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you one last question. This one is actually, I do apologize, everyone, this one's from me. So one of the things that I loved in uncertainty mindset, and there are so many things, I could name them off, but is this idea of familiar novelty and sort of creating a house style for your business, which does play again into, I know I've said it a lot, but do the thing that you can do, that only you can do. But sometimes I feel like it can be really daunting to make that identification. Do you have any advice for like how you strip that down and identify what it is that the things are that you are particularly good at as a business?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. This actually is probably the most important question if what you're trying to do is run a business that is not simply doing what someone else does as well as they do, right? That is also a way of thinking about why you should do business, but maybe that's not what people become really passionate about. I think I am not the kind of person who advocates doing something just because of passion, but, and this goes directly to your question, I think it's really important to recognize when something you're doing is enjoyable because you genuinely enjoy it, even if it wouldn't make you money.
Yeah.
And then once you've used that as a way to identify the things that you really enjoy doing as a business, then you can try and figure out how to make it make money. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that what you really, really love, and let's think way back before anyone thought about sourcing directly if you were a small roaster, right? Mm-hmm. If at that time you realized that buying from the big wholesalers, if you were a roaster and you bought from the big wholesalers, what you got was you got pretty uniform, homogeneous stuff. It really didn't excite you. And then when you managed to find some specific lot, like maybe you bought a Cup of Excellence lot somewhere and you were like, holy shit, this is really distinctive. I really love this.
Yeah.
That's a sign, right? That's a sign that what you really care about is distinctiveness in the bean. Now, how do you get that? You cannot get it through your current sources of supply for green bean because nobody is doing micro lot stuff yet. This is way back. Mm-hmm. So maybe what you have to do then, if you're designing a new business model, is think about how you would make a roasting operation viable economically if you were sourcing micro lots directly. Mm-hmm. And if you can answer that question, then what you've done is you've created third and fourth wave coffee. Well, fourth wave coffee, right? And that would be really interesting. And so nowadays, now that we've got fourth wave coffee already, the next thing that people do that is the new thing that isn't being done now, but which they're feeling passionate about, might be about service. Right now, everyone, let's think back again now, maybe 10 years, maybe more, when the default for high quality coffee was espresso. And then someone went to Japan probably and realized that there was Nel drip and it was amazing. And wouldn't it be really cool if you could have an all manual methods only or predominantly manual methods coffee shop? And at that time, nobody knew how to do this. It's not as quick. You can't sell it for as much money. How do you make it work? But you're passionate about it and you figure out, I got to do it in a place that's smaller. I got to do it personally. I got to do it. It's about figuring out first what you're excited by and then figuring out how to make it work as a business rather than trying to do both at the same time. All right. Anyway, I know that we need to wind down, so do what you need to do.
Cool. Thank you, Vaughn, so much for this. This has been a great chat. I'm really looking forward to picking up some of the threads here at Rico in a month's time. It's been a real pleasure, and I can't thank you enough for all of the work that you do that is, Creative Commons and is like helping businesses generally. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. And
cheers.